Los Angeles, California, Memorial Coliseum Marina, September 14, 1972. Thursday afternoon, 3:00 p.m. The sun hangs low over the city, casting long shadows across the concrete walls of one of America's most iconic sporting venues. Inside, the air is different. It carries weight, the kind of weight that only settles in a place when something genuinely historic is about to happen. 45,000 people have packed themselves into every available seat. They came from different cities, different countries, different worlds. Some drove through the night. Some flew in from Europe. Some had been waiting outside the gate since before sunrise, clutching their tickets like they were holding something sacred, because, in a way, they were. Nobody who received an invitation to witness this event threw it away. Nobody who heard about this refused to come, because the name attached to this event was not just a name. It was a statement. It was a warning. It was a legend that had spent 15 years building itself into something the sporting world had never seen before and would likely never see again. His name was Eric Magnusson, and if you had never heard that name before today, that simply meant you had not been paying attention. Eric Magnusson was born in Bergen, Norway, in 1938. He stood 6 feet and 6 inches tall. He weighed 260 pounds. Every single pound of that weight was the result of a life spent in pursuit of one singular goal: to become the most physically devastating human being who had ever lived. His arms were like iron beams wrapped in skin. His shoulders were so wide that he had to turn sideways to pass through standard doorways. His hands, when closed into fists, were larger than most men's faces. He had a long, braided beard that fell across his chest like a war decoration, and his hair was pulled back in a thick braid that hung down between his shoulder blades. He looked less like a man and more like something carved out of a Norwegian mountain and given breath. But his appearance was not what made Eric Magnus dangerous. What made him dangerous was his record. In 15 years of professional fighting across Europe and North America, Eric Magnusson had never lost. Not once, not a single time. He had fought 47 men across 9 different combat disciplines: wrestlers, boxers, street fighters, military combat specialists, trained killers from 3 different continents. Every single one of them had ended up on the ground. Some of them ended up in hospitals. 2 of them never competed professionally again. Eric Magnusson had walked out of every single one of those 47 encounters without a single serious injury, without a broken bone, without a moment where the outcome felt uncertain. The sporting world had run out of opponents for him. Promoters across Europe had stopped calling because they had nobody left to offer. Every fighter with a serious reputation had either already faced him and lost, or had quietly made it known through their management that they were not interested in stepping into any ring with Eric Magnusson under any circumstances for any amount of money. That was the situation as it stood on the morning of August 3rd, 1972, when Eric Magnusson walked into a press conference in New York City and said the words that changed everything. He sat down in front of a room full of journalists, looked directly into the cameras, and spoke with the calm certainty of a man who had never had any reason to doubt himself. "I have defeated every serious fighter this world has produced. I have beaten boxers, wrestlers, soldiers, and street fighters. I have traveled to every continent in search of a real challenge, and I have found nothing. There is one name that people keep mentioning to me, one name that keeps appearing in conversation whenever I ask who has left. Bruce Lee, a martial arts performer from Hong Kong who makes movies and gives demonstrations. People tell me he is fast. People tell me his techniques are different. I want to say something clearly to Bruce Lee and to everyone watching. Come to Los Angeles. Step into a ring with me. I will end this conversation about martial arts being something special in less than 60 seconds. I will crush him easily, and after I do, perhaps this world will stop pretending that anything can stand against real power. The room went completely silent for 3 full seconds after he finished speaking. Then every journalist in that room reached for their telephone at exactly the same time. Bruce Lee was in Oakland when he heard about it. He was conducting a private training session inside his personal gym, working through a series of movements so precise and so controlled that the 2 senior students watching him had stopped practicing entirely. They simply stood and watched, because there are moments when a person moves with such absolute mastery that witnessing it feels more important than anything else you could possibly be doing with your time. This was one of those moments. Bruce was 31 years old. He stood 5 feet and 7 inches tall and weighed 140 pounds. To anyone who did not know him, he looked like an ordinary man, lean, compact, unremarkable in the way that a sheathed blade looks unremarkable until the moment it is drawn. His arms carried no exaggerated bulk. His chest was not the chest of a man who spent his life lifting heavy objects. Every muscle on his body existed for exactly one purpose: function. Pure, devastating, perfectly calibrated function. There was not a single pound on Bruce Lee's body that did not serve a specific purpose in combat. His face, when he trained, was completely still. Not the stillness of a man who is not thinking, the stillness of a man whose thinking has gone so deep that it has moved beyond the surface entirely. His eyes tracked everything simultaneously. The position of his feet on the floor, the angle of his arms in relation to his center line, the distribution of his weight across both legs. He was not just training his body, he was having a conversation with physics. One of his students, a young man named David Chen, who had been training under Bruce for 3 years, quietly entered the gym holding a folded newspaper. He waited near the doorway. He did not interrupt. He had learned early in his training that interrupting Bruce during a session was not something a person did twice. Bruce completed his movement sequence, held the final position for 4 full seconds, then released. He turned and looked at David with the calm awareness of a man who had known someone was standing there since the moment they entered. David crossed the gym and handed him the newspaper without a word. The headline covered the top half of the front page. Eric Magnus challenges Bruce Lee. Viking fighter calls martial arts a performance, says he will crush Lee in 60 seconds. Bruce read the article from beginning to end. He did not rush. He did not skim. He read every single word with the same precise attention he gave to everything. When he finished, he folded the newspaper along its original crease and held it in his hand for a long moment. His students watched him carefully. They had seen Bruce respond to many things over the years. They had seen him respond to disrespect, to skepticism, to challenges from fighters who did not understand what they were inviting. They thought they knew what was coming, a dismissal perhaps, or a quiet, measured statement about why this particular challenge was not worth his time. What they did not expect was what actually happened. Bruce looked up from the newspaper, and there was something in his eyes that neither of his students had seen there before. Not anger, not amusement, something quieter than both of those things, and far more focused. "How much does he weigh?" Bruce asked. David answered immediately. 260 pounds, 6 feet 6. Bruce nodded slowly, the way a man nods when information confirms something he has already been considering. And his record, 47 fights, David said. 47 wins. Nobody has ever taken him past the second round. Bruce was quiet for a long moment. The gym was completely silent, except for the faint sound of traffic from the street outside. Then Bruce placed the newspaper carefully on the bench beside him, turned back to the center of the gym floor, and resumed his training. His movements were identical to what they had been before. Same precision, same control, same absolute calm. But 30 seconds later, without stopping his movement or turning around, he spoke. "Tell them I will be in Los Angeles in 3 weeks." The 3 weeks that followed were unlike anything the combat sports world had ever experienced. The story spread the way only truly extraordinary stories spread, not through careful promotion or calculated media campaigns, but organically, person to person, city to city, country to country. A Viking warrior who had never lost a single fight in 15 years had called out Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee had accepted. Those 2 sentences were enough. They traveled through boxing gyms and martial arts schools, through Hollywood studios and university campuses, through newspaper offices and television stations, through the kind of conversations that happen late at night when people are talking about things that genuinely mattered to them. The reaction was immediate, and it was divided directly down the middle. In boxing gyms across America, the conversation was unanimous. Eric Magnuson was going to destroy Bruce Lee. The numbers alone told the story. 120 pounds of weight difference, 7 inches of height difference, 47 professional victories against 0. These were not opinions, these were facts. And facts in the world of professional fighting did not care about philosophy or technique or the reputation of a man who made movies. Power was power, size was size, and when a 260-pound man who had spent 15 years destroying professional fighters decided to put his hands on a 140-pound man who had never competed professionally, there was only one possible outcome. The only genuine question, as far as the boxing community was concerned, was whether Bruce Lee would be seriously injured. In martial arts schools across the same country, the conversation was completely different. Bruce Lee was not just a fighter. He was the living embodiment of a principle that martial arts had been trying to communicate to the Western world for decades. That combat was not about size, that it was not about weight or height or the raw measurement of physical power. It was about understanding, about precision, about the ability to find and exploit the specific vulnerabilities that existed in every human body, regardless of how large or powerful that body happened to be. Bruce Lee had demonstrated things in private sessions that seemed to contradict the known laws of physics. His speed had been measured, and the measurements had been questioned because the numbers seemed impossible. His striking power relative to his body weight had no equivalent in the documented history of combat sports. If anyone on earth could walk into a ring with Eric Magnuson and survive, it was Bruce Lee. If anyone could do more than survive, it was also Bruce Lee. Eric Magnuson spent those 3 weeks exactly the way everyone expected him to. He trained. He gave interviews. He made statements. He was not a subtle man, and he had never needed to be. Subtlety was a tool used by people who were not certain of victory. Eric Magnuson had been certain of victory for 15 consecutive years, and the certainty had never once been wrong. In one interview that was broadcast on 3 separate television networks, he sat across from a journalist who asked him whether he was concerned about Bruce Lee's speed. Eric looked at the journalist for a long moment before answering. "I have fought men who are fast," he said. "Speed is interesting. It is an entertaining quality, but speed requires a target to be effective, and I do not give targets easily. When I hit something, it does not get up and come back. It stays where I put it. Bruce Lee is welcome to be as fast as he wants to be. Fast men fall the same way as slow men when the right force finds them." He leaned forward in his chair, and his eyes carried the absolute conviction of a man who had never had any reason to believe he could be wrong. "I am not fighting Bruce Lee to prove a point. I'm not interested in debates about martial arts versus wrestling or East versus West. I'm doing this because someone needs to end this conversation permanently. Bruce Lee is a gifted performer. He is impressive to watch, but impressive and dangerous are 2 completely different things. On September 14th, inside the Memorial Coliseum, in front of every person who has ever believed that martial arts is something more than theater. I will demonstrate the difference. Bruce Lee gave no interviews during those 3 weeks. He made no public statements. He did not respond to Eric's words through the media. He did not appear at press events or promotional gatherings. He trained privately, completely with a kind of focused isolation that his closest students recognized immediately as the state Bruce entered when he was preparing for something that genuinely required everything he had. His head instructor later recalled that during those 3 weeks, Bruce arrived at the gym before sunrise every single morning and did not leave until after dark. He did not speak about Eric Magnuson by name during that entire period. He spoke only about principles, about angles, about the precise relationship between force and vulnerability, about what happens to the human nervous system when specific points are struck with specific accuracy at specific moments. He was not preparing to fight Eric Magnuson. He was preparing to solve him. September 14th arrived the way significant days always arrive, without announcement, without ceremony. The sun rose over Los Angeles exactly as it had risen every other morning, indifferent to the fact that 45,000 people were already moving toward a single point in the city with the focused energy of a tide that had been building for 3 weeks. The Memorial Coliseum had seen extraordinary things in its lifetime. It had hosted 2 Olympic Games. It had witnessed championship fights that became permanent entries in the history of sport. It had held moments that people carried with them for the rest of their lives, moments they described to their children and their grandchildren with the particular precision that only genuine memory produces. But the people who worked at the Coliseum, the staff members who had spent years inside its walls, said afterward that they had never felt the building carry the kind of energy it carried on that Thursday afternoon. It was not excitement exactly. It was something older than excitement, something closer to the feeling that settles over a place when everyone present understands that what is about to happen will not be forgotten. The gates opened at noon. By 12:30, every seat in the lower sections was filled. By 1 o'clock, the upper sections were filling rapidly. By 2 o'clock, 45,000 people sat inside the Memorial Coliseum under a September sun, waiting. The noise they produced was continuous and layered, the sound of thousands of separate conversations happening simultaneously, a sound that rose and fell like breathing. Among those 45,000 people, the division that had existed for 3 weeks in gyms and schools and living rooms across the country had followed them inside the building. It was visible in the way people sat, in the conversations happening around every section, in the arguments that broke out between strangers who had never met before, and would likely never meet again, but who felt strongly enough about what they believed to say it directly to someone who believed the opposite. In the East Stands, a group of professional wrestlers from a touring circuit had taken seats together. Their collective weight was somewhere in the region of 2,000 pounds. They had all watched Eric Magnuson fight on at least 2 separate occasions, and every single one of them had the same opinion delivered in the same tone of absolute certainty. Bruce Lee was going to be carried out of that ring. The only variable was how quickly it happened. 3 sections away, a group of martial arts instructors from schools across California sat in a configuration that suggested they had planned their seating in advance. They had collectively trained under some of the most respected masters in Asia. They had devoted their lives to the same principles Bruce Lee embodied. They did not argue with the wrestlers. They did not need to. What was coming would speak for itself. Eric Magnuson entered the arena at 2:30. He came through the main tunnel on the north side of the Coliseum, and the moment he emerged into the open air and the crowd saw him, the noise changed. It became something with direction, something that moved. He walked toward the ring with the unhurried stride of a man who had made this walk 47 times before and found it unremarkable. He wore plain black shorts and nothing else. His body in the afternoon sunlight was extraordinary. Every muscle was visible beneath his skin with a sharp definition of something that had been built, not in a gym for appearance, but in a life for purpose. His braided beard moved against his chest as he walked. His braided hair lay across his back like a rope. He was 260 pounds of absolute physical certainty, and he moved like he owned every inch of ground beneath his feet. He climbed into the ring and stood at the center, looking out at 45,000 people with the expression of a man surveying a landscape he has already decided belongs to him. He raised one fist above his head. The crowd responded with a sound that shook the structure of the building. Then he pointed toward the south tunnel. He was not pointing at anything in particular. He was making a statement. He was saying, without words, that whatever was coming through that tunnel was already defeated, that the outcome had already been decided, that what was about to happen was not a contest, but a confirmation of something he had known since the morning he first heard the name Bruce Lee spoken in the same sentence as the word challenge. The south tunnel remained empty for 30 seconds after Eric's gesture. Then Bruce Lee walked out. He came alone. No corner team walking beside him. No entourage surrounding him. No one carrying equipment or towels or anything that suggested this was a managed professional event. Just Bruce Lee walking through the tunnel into the September afternoon light, wearing black shorts and simple black training shoes and MMA gloves that looked almost delicate against the backdrop of everything else present in that arena. He walked to the ring at a pace that did not change, did not slow when the crowd noise hit him, did not accelerate, did not look up at the stands or acknowledge the 45,000 people watching his every movement. He simply walked with the complete self-containment of a man who exists entirely within himself, regardless of what is happening around him. He stepped through the ropes and stood in his corner. For the first time, the 2 men were in the same ring. Eric was larger than any photograph had suggested. Standing 30 feet away, the size difference between them was not just visible, it was staggering. It looked like something that should not be happening It looked like a mistake. Bruce Lee looked at Eric Magnuson across the ring with eyes that were completely still, and for the first time since the press conference 6 weeks ago, Eric Magnuson looked back at someone and felt something he did not immediately recognize, because he had not felt it in 15 years. Uncertainty. The referee was a man named James Whitfield. He had spent 22 years inside professional fighting arenas in every capacity a person could occupy: cornerman, trainer, judge, and finally referee. He had stood at the center of rings during moments that had defined careers and ended them. He was not a man who was easily affected by atmosphere or crowd energy or the weight of occasion. He had developed over 2 decades the particular professional detachment that the job required, the ability to be present inside a significant moment without being consumed by it. But when James Whitfield walked to the center of the Memorial Coliseum ring on the afternoon of September 14th, 1972, and looked at the 2 men standing in opposite corners, he felt something move through him that his professional detachment could not entirely contain. He recognized it afterward when he described the moment to people who asked him about it for years afterward as the feeling of standing at the exact center of something that history had already decided to remember. He called both fighters to the center of the ring. Eric walked forward with the rolling, unhurried stride that had become his signature across 15 years and 47 fights. His fists were loosely closed at his sides. His chin was slightly raised. He stopped at the center mark and looked down at Bruce Lee with an expression that contained no hostility, no anger, no heat of any kind. Something colder than all of those things, the complete absence of doubt. Bruce walked to the center with his hands relaxed at his sides. He stopped directly across from Eric and looked up at him with eyes that did not move to measure the size difference, did not track upward to take in the full scale of what was standing in front of him. He simply looked at Eric's eyes and nowhere else. James Whitfield stood between them and began to speak. This contest will be conducted under unified combat rules. All striking techniques are permitted. All grappling techniques are permitted. A fighter loses if he is knocked unconscious, submits, or if the referee stops the contest, there are no rounds. The contest continues until there is a definitive conclusion. He looked at Eric first. Do you understand and accept these conditions? Eric nodded once without speaking. Whitfield looked at Bruce. Do you understand and accept these conditions? Bruce nodded once without speaking. Whitfield took a single step back. When the bell sounds, you may begin. The 2 men returned to their corners. In the 60 seconds that followed, the Memorial Coliseum became the quietest it had been since the gates opened. 45,000 people sat in a silence that was not passive but active. The silence of people who are concentrating, who are storing everything they are about to witness with the particular intensity of people who already understand that they will be asked to describe this moment for the rest of their lives. In his corner, Eric Magnuson stood with his eyes fixed on Bruce Lee across the ring. His cornerman said something to him in Norwegian. Eric did not respond. He was not listening. He was looking at the 140-pound man standing 60 feet away and running the same calculation he had run before every one of his 47 previous fights. The calculation was simple. It had always been simple. Where is the opening? When does it appear? How much force is required to end this permanently? The answer in 47 previous contests had always come within the first 30 seconds. In his corner, Bruce Lee stood with his eyes half closed. His breathing was controlled in a pattern his students would have recognized immediately. 4 counts in, hold for 4 counts, release for 4 counts. The pattern he used to move his body from its ordinary state into the particular state of readiness that existed below conscious thought, below reaction, in the place where his training had built something that functioned faster and more accurately than his thinking mind could ever operate. He was not thinking about Eric Magnusson's size. He was not thinking about the 47 victories or the fighters who had ended up in hospitals. He was not thinking about the 45,000 people watching or the history of the moment, or what winning or losing would mean for martial arts or for himself. He was thinking about one thing only, the specific point on the human body, 3 inches below the sternum and 2 inches to the left of the center line, where the celiac plexus nerve cluster sat closest to the surface. The point where a strike of sufficient precision delivered at the correct angle with the correct distribution of force, from ground through leg, through hip, through core, through arm, through fist, would not cause pain in the ordinary sense, would not simply damage tissue or break bone, would instead send a signal through the nervous system so overwhelming that the body's only possible response was immediate, total, involuntary shutdown. He had been thinking about that point for 3 weeks. He had been training to reach it for 3 weeks through 260 pounds of muscle, through 15 years of developed defensive instinct, through the particular combat awareness of a man who had never once been seriously threatened in a professional contest. The bell sounded. The first 10 seconds told the crowd something they had not expected. Eric Magnus did not charge. This surprised people who had watched his previous fights and seen the pattern that had defined every single one of them. In 47 previous contests, Eric had moved forward from the opening bell with the unstoppable momentum of something that had been held back and released. He had always been the aggressor, always the one who closed distance and imposed his physical reality on whatever was standing in front of him. It was the foundation of everything he did. Get close, get his hands on the opponent. Once his hands found someone, the fight was already over. But in the first 10 seconds of this contest, Eric did not charge. He moved forward carefully, measuring. His eyes tracked Bruce Lee with an attention that his previous opponents had never required from him, because Bruce Lee was not standing still. He was not backing away either. He was moving in a way that Eric had never encountered in 15 years of professional fighting, not retreating, not circling in the predictable lateral patterns that trained boxers used, moving in lines that changed direction at moments that seemed to have no pattern, no rhythm, no predictable sequence that Eric's combat experience could identify and anticipate. It was like trying to track water. Bruce covered the distance between them and retreated from it in movements so fluid and so fast that Eric's eyes, which had spent 15 years developing the ability to read fighters, could not establish a reliable fix on where Bruce was going to be in the next half-second. Every time Eric's body began the automatic process of committing to a direction, Bruce was no longer there. 12 seconds into the contest, Eric threw his first strike. It was not a wild swing. It was a precise, controlled right hand thrown from a distance that Eric had calculated was close enough to reach and far enough to generate force. In 47 previous fights, that strike had connected every single time it was thrown. The fighters who received it did not get up immediately afterward. Bruce was not there when it arrived. He had moved 45 degrees to his left, in a motion so compressed and so fast that the 45,000 people watching could not follow it with their eyes. One moment he was in front of Eric's fist. The next moment he was beside him inside the arc of the strike, closer to Eric's body than Eric had intended anyone to get. The crowd made a sound that was not a cheer. It was something involuntary. The sound a person makes when they see something that their brain has not finished processing. Eric reset immediately. He was not a man who was rattled by a missed strike. He had the deep composure of someone who had been in enough difficult moments to know that composure was the most valuable thing a fighter possessed. He turned, re-established his position, and looked at Bruce Lee with eyes that now carried something different in them than they had 30 seconds ago. He was recalibrating. He had fought fast men before, men whose speed had initially surprised him before he adjusted, found the pattern in their movement, and shut them down. Speed in his considerable experience always had a pattern. Every fast fighter he had ever faced moved quickly, but moved predictably. Because the human body, regardless of how well trained it was, had a limited number of directions it could move, and a limited number of ways it could generate striking force. Once you identified the pattern, speed became irrelevant. He spent the next 20 seconds looking for Bruce Lee's pattern. He could not find one. Eric threw 3 more strikes in those 20 seconds. Each one was calculated. Each one was placed with the accuracy that 15 years of fighting had built into his muscle memory. Each one found empty air, and each time a strike missed, Bruce Lee was not simply away from it. He was somewhere that created a problem, a position that forced Eric to reset rather than follow up. That interrupted the combinations Eric had built an entire career around, that denied him the forward momentum that was the engine of everything he did. At the 40 mark, something changed in Eric Magnus's body. It was not visible to most of the 45,000 people watching. It would not have been visible to most trained observers either. But James Whitfield, standing 8 feet away with 22 years of experience reading fighters in real time, saw it immediately. Eric's right shoulder dropped 3 millimeters. It was the adjustment a body makes when it has been working harder than expected and is beginning to redirect energy reserves. It was the physical signature of a fighter who had entered a contest with a fixed expectation and was now 40 seconds in, beginning to process the possibility that the expectation was wrong. It lasted less than 1 second. Eric corrected immediately, his conditioning snapping his posture back to its proper position with the automatic precision of 15 years of training. But Bruce Lee had also seen it, and unlike James Whitfield, Bruce did not simply observe it. He moved. What happened in the next 4 seconds was described differently by every single person who witnessed it. The wrestlers in the East stand said Bruce moved toward Eric, and then there was contact, and then Eric was making a sound they had never heard a fighter make before. The martial arts instructors 3 sections away said they saw the movement clearly, that it was a technique they recognized from the highest levels of their discipline, executed with a perfection that none of them had ever seen in a live situation. The sports journalists scattered throughout the arena said they saw Bruce close the distance, but could not describe what happened after that because it happened faster than their eyes could organize into a sequence. James Whitfield, standing 8 feet away with 22 years of experience, said afterward that he saw the strike land, but could not tell anyone with certainty how it was thrown because the preparation for it was invisible. Every account was different in its details. Every account agreed on the result. Bruce Lee moved toward Eric Magnuson in a straight line, not circling, not feinting, a direct, committed straight line that covered the distance between them in a time that the human eye could not measure accurately. As he moved, his body dropped 3 inches, shifting his angle of approach in a way that redirected Eric's automatic defensive response toward a point in space where Bruce was no longer going to be. Eric's left arm began to move in response, the defensive adjustment of a man whose instincts had been built by 15 years of real combat situations, instincts that were faster and more reliable than conscious thought. The instincts were not fast enough. Bruce's right hand had already traveled from his side to a point 4 inches from Eric's body before Eric's defensive movement was halfway through its arc. The strike did not travel in a straight line from shoulder to target. It traveled in a path that curved inside the space Eric's arm was moving through, threading between Eric's elbow and his body in a gap that was 3 inches wide at the moment Bruce's fist passed through it, a gap that existed for less than half a second before Eric's arm would have closed it. Bruce's fist made contact with a point 3 inches below Eric Magnus's sternum and 2 inches left of his center line. The force of the strike, measured afterward by physicists who interviewed Bruce about the mechanics, was later estimated at somewhere between 150 and 170 pounds of focused pressure, delivered to an area approximately the size of a silver dollar, not distributed across a surface, concentrated, directed inward and slightly upward at an angle of 17 degrees from horizontal, aimed not at the surface of the body, but at the celiac plexus nerve cluster sitting 2 inches beneath the surface. The sound it produced was sharp and precise, not the heavy thud of a power strike absorbing into mass, a crack, clean and final, like a single note struck on an instrument that had been tuned to that exact frequency. Eric Magnus's body responded the way a body responds when its central nervous system receives a signal it has no framework to process and no defense against. Not with pain, not with the voluntary response a fighter produces when he absorbs a strike and chooses to continue. With something that bypassed choice entirely, his diaphragm locked. His legs, which had carried 260 pounds of muscle through 15 years and 47 fights without ever failing him, stopped functioning as legs and became something that simply held his weight for 1 more second before that, too, became impossible. He went down, not backward, not in the stumbling off-balance collapse of a man who has been hit hard and is trying to recover. Straight down, both knees finding the canvas simultaneously, with a sound that the front rows heard clearly over the noise of 45,000 people who had just stopped making noise at exactly the same moment. Eric Magnus was on both knees on the canvas of the Memorial Coliseum. His hands were pressed flat against the surface in front of him. His head was down. His braided hair had fallen forward across one shoulder. His breathing, which had powered 260 pounds of muscle through every physical challenge his extraordinary life had produced, was not working. His diaphragm was in complete spasm. The signal his brain was sending to his lungs was not arriving. He was conscious, completely conscious. His mind was functioning with perfect clarity. He could hear the silence of 45,000 people. He could feel the canvas beneath his hands. He could see in his peripheral vision Bruce Lee's feet standing 18 inches away from where his own hands were pressed against the floor. He simply could not move. He could not breathe. He could not make his body respond to anything his mind was telling it. James Whitfield moved to him immediately, dropping to one knee beside him, speaking directly into his ear. "Eric, can you hear me? Eric, look at me. Tell me you can breathe." Eric raised his head slowly. His eyes found Whitfield's face. He nodded once, a single, small, effortful nod that communicated more than any words he had ever spoken in a professional arena. "I hear you. I am here. I cannot explain what just happened to me, but I am here." Bruce Lee stood 18 in a way and did not move, did not raise his hands, did not turn to the crowd, did not make any gesture toward the 45,000 people who were now beginning to find their voices again after the longest silence that building had ever held. He simply stood and waited with the complete stillness of a man who had done exactly what he came to do, and needed nothing from the moment beyond the moment itself. The silence lasted 11 seconds, 11 seconds during which 45,000 people sat completely still inside the Memorial Coliseum and did not make a single sound. 11 seconds during which the only movements visible in the entire arena were James Whitfield kneeling beside Eric Magnusson, Eric's hands pressing slowly harder against the canvas as his body began its gradual return to function, and Bruce Lee standing 18 inches away in the absolute stillness that had defined him from the moment he walked through that tunnel. Then the silence broke, not with a cheer, not with the explosive roar that arenas produce when something dramatic happens and the crowd releases the tension it has been holding. It broke the way glass breaks when the pressure on it finally exceeds what it was built to contain. Starting in one section, spreading to the next, moving outward in all directions simultaneously until the entire building was filled with a sound that was part disbelief, part recognition, part something that did not have a name, because the feeling that produced it had never existed in that arena before. 45,000 people had just watched a 140-pound man bring a 260-pound undefeated warrior to his knees with a single strike that most of them could not describe, because they had not been able to see it clearly enough to put it into words. Eric Magnusson's breathing returned fully at the 90 mark. His diaphragm released its spasm gradually, each breath coming a little easier than the one before it, until his lungs were functioning normally, and the color was returning to his face, and his hands were no longer pressed against the canvas, but resting on his own knees as he knelt and processed what had happened to him. James Whitfield helped him to his feet. Eric stood. He took 2 full breaths. He rolled his shoulders once, the automatic physical assessment of a man checking whether his body was intact. It was. There was no damage beyond the spasm, no broken bones, no torn tissue, no injury that would require medical attention. His body was completely functional. The strike had not been designed to damage him. It had been designed to stop him, and it had stopped him with a precision that left everything else untouched. He looked across the ring at Bruce Lee. Bruce met his eyes and held them. For 10 seconds, the two men looked at each other across the ring with 45,000 people watching and the noise of the arena filling the space around them. And in those 10 seconds, something passed between them that the crowd could feel, even though they could not see it or name it. The particular recognition that exists only between two people who have just been in the same extraordinary moment together and understand exactly what it meant. Eric Magnus walked across the ring. He stopped directly in front of Bruce Lee. He was still a foot taller, still 120 pounds heavier, still the man who had never been defeated in 15 years on 47 professional contests. None of that had changed. What had changed was what those facts meant to him now. They had meant everything when he walked into this arena. They meant something different now, something more complicated, something that would take him a long time to fully understand. He extended his right hand. Bruce took it. Eric held the handshake for a long moment before he spoke. His voice was low enough that only Bruce could hear him over the noise of the crowd. "I have been fighting for 15 years, Eric said. I have stood in front of every kind of fighter this world produces. I have never felt what I just felt. Not once, not even close." He paused. "What you did is not supposed to be possible." Bruce held his gaze. When he spoke, his voice carried the quietness of a man who has nothing to prove and therefore nothing to perform. "Everything is possible," Bruce said, "when you stop fighting the way you were taught and start fighting the way the situation requires. You are the strongest man I have ever faced. Your power is real, and it is extraordinary. But power without a target is only energy. Tonight, I did not fight your strength. I went around it. That is not a defeat for you. It is simply a door. What you do after you walk through it is what matters." Eric looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. He turned to face the arena, still holding Bruce's hand, and raised it above both their heads. The sound that followed was the loudest the Memorial Coliseum had produced that entire afternoon, not because the crowd had decided who won, but because 45,000 people had just witnessed something that transcended winning and losing entirely, something that would live in their memories with the particular permanence of moments that change the way a person sees the world. They had come to watch a fight. They had witnessed something they would spend the rest of their lives trying to explain to people who were not there, people who would listen and nod and say they understood, people who could never actually understand because understanding required being present in that arena on that Thursday afternoon in September 1972, when a 140-pound man walked through a tunnel alone, stepped into a ring with the most physically powerful fighter in the world, and showed 45,000 people something that none of them had believed was real until the moment they saw it with their own eyes. The truth that size is only one kind of power, that there exists another kind entirely, a kind that cannot be built in a gym or measured on a scale or defeated by adding more weight to one side, the kind that lives in understanding, in precision, in the willingness to see not what is in front of you, but what is within it. Bruce Lee walked out of the Memorial Coliseum the same way he had walked in, alone, without ceremony, without stopping for the journalists who called after him or the crowd that parted to let him through. He walked through the tunnel and into the September evening and disappeared. He left behind 45,000 witnesses and one undefeated warrior kneeling on a canvas. Both of them changed in ways they were only beginning to understand. And if you found this story extraordinary, if something in these 8 parts made you see the world of combat and human potential differently, then you already understand what Bruce Lee spent his entire life trying to teach, that the most powerful thing any person can possess is not found in the size of their body or the length of their record. It is found in the depth of their understanding. Subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon so you never miss a story like this one. Like this video so that more people can find their way to these extraordinary moments in history, because there are more stories waiting. Stories of warriors and legends and moments that the world forgot or never knew. Stories that deserve to be told, and we will tell every single one.